we want to wrap up our consideration of the apology with some thinking about the penalty stage of the trial. So Socrates has been found guilty, and now both his accusers, the prosecutors, and he, in his own defense, have to propose alternative penalties, which the jury will then decide between. We want to wrap that up and then see if we can also make a few concluding observations or reflections about the dialogue as a whole. In some ways, it's very simple to talk about the penalties that the two sides in this trial propose. Meletus and the accusers obviously propose death as the penalty for Socrates. And Socrates then, in return, asked the question, well, what should I propose for myself? Certainly, I ought to propose a punishment that I deserve, because punishments are always about giving people what they deserve. And so what do I deserve? And he says, well, I actually do a very great good for the city. I go around asking all of you to think about your lives and not to be satisfied with yourselves until you know that you're just and good. And that's a good thing for you. And so therefore, what I deserve should also be something good. And so what should I propose for myself? Well, he says, there is nothing more fitting, men of Athens, than for such a man to be given his meals in the Prytaneum, much more so than if any of you has won a victory at Olympia with a horse or a 2 or 4 horse chariot. Given his meals in the Prytaneum. That may be a little bit puzzling, but what Socrates is proposing is that he should receive the awards, the honors, the prizes that were really reserved for people like Olympic champions, heroes of the city. He's going to get, in effect, free meals for life. He's going to get to live in this place and be fed every day at the expense of the city. So Socrates says, you think I should get death? What penalty will I propose? Well, I think what I deserve and what I should get is free meals for life. Now, that is obviously pretty outrageous and makes it a little hard at this point not to think that Socrates is really asking for it. He does consider a couple other penalties. He says, well, I could propose a fee, but in fact, I don't have any money, so I can't pay a fine, because I'm poor. So I can't really do that. He says, I could propose exile. I could just say, well, I'll leave the city. But he says that won't really work either, because wherever I go, I'm going to ask the same kind of questions. And if you, my own fellow citizens, couldn't put up with me, of course, they're going to hate me other places as well. And so I'll just kind of go from one city to the next as this old guy bounced around, never having a home, hated wherever he goes. I don't want that. So I don't have these other penalties I can propose. He does finally, he says at first, I deserve free meals for life. The actual penalty he proposes in the end is actually a very small, well, I shouldn't say it's small, it's not small. He proposes a fine. Because if you're paying attention, you notice that his friends in the audience offer to put up money for him. He says there at the end of that penalty section, oh, but Plato here, men of Athens. So Plato has written himself into the dialogue. And Crito and Critobulus and Apollodorus, these are all friends of his, bid me to propose 30 minae. That's actually a decent fine. So Socrates himself does not have much money, but his friends offer to put up some money so he could propose a fine instead, hoping they might get him off. And I think to appreciate the drama, you have to kind of ask yourself what's going on there. Socrates is standing up in front of everybody and saying, well, I think I should get free meals for life. And his friends must be sitting there in the audience, looking at each other in shock. What did he just say? Socrates, what are you doing? Are you crazy? So no, like Socrates, look, we're waving at him. We'll get his attention. We'll put up a fine for you. We'll offer to pay him for you, but the damage has been done. Right at that point, Socrates has certainly provoked the people listening beyond the point at which he's going to get let off the hook. And of course, they vote to condemn him to death. The dialogue ends with a few pages with Socrates addressing the audience once more. I don't want to say a whole lot about that. I think for our purposes, that's not so critical. First, he talks to the people who have voted to convict him and says to them basically, you are going to regret this. And in fact, we know historically that the city of Athens did come to regret this. After about a generation, they concluded they'd made a mistake by executing Socrates. They'd done the wrong thing. And Socrates said, look, you're going to regret this. You're going to be sorry. And you think that by killing me, you can solve your problems. People are going to stop bothering you and pestering you. They're going to stop trying to hold you to account for your own life. But if you think that, you're mistaken. Says, because killing me is not going to end that. When I'm gone, other people are going to rise up in my place and do the same thing. The kind of people who have been talking with me and following me and learning from me. He says, you think you've had it bad with me, but the truth is it's going to be even worse because they're younger than I am. going to be harsher with you than I was. They're going to want vengeance from you for what you've done. And so I've kind of been actually holding them back. He says, you didn't notice that there were these other people out there, but once I'm gone, they're going to come after you. They're going to ask you the same kind of questions. Don't think you can get off the hook for having to give an account of your own life by killing one man. It won't work. And then he turns to the people who voted to acquit him, and he says, more or less, don't feel bad about this, right? Don't be upset. Don't be sad. Nothing bad has happened. That daemon, that voice that talks to me and warns me when I'm going to do something wrong, hasn't said a word to me all day. Like, so I know that what I was doing was okay. It's never tried to stop me, turn me back. And what is death like? Socrates asks. He says, well, look, either it's like your life just ends. It's like the longest sleep you've ever had, the longest, best, soundest sleep, because you're just asleep for the rest of time. And that's nothing to be afraid of, a sound night's sleep, in effect. Or some of the stories about the underworld are true. And I'm going to go down to Hades. And what I'm going to do there, well, I'm going to find all these great heroes from the past, people like Achilles and Odysseus and Hector. And I'm going to ask them questions too. I'm going to start asking them all the same kind of things I asked you about how to lead your life, how to lead a good life. And that's going to be, wouldn't that be just an amazing existence? I get to talk to the greatest wise men and heroes and sages of old and ask them about how a person should lead his life. And so that would be, actually, this is a wonderful little glimpse into Socrates. I always think, like, when Socrates pictures what would the happiest eternity be like? Well, if I could just keep philosophizing and asking people stuff, and not just asking anybody, but the wisest people of all, asking them stuff, that would be a wonderful way to spend the rest of eternity. So he makes those speeches at the end, and he's carted off to prison to await his execution. But we need to ask ourselves, in conclusion, why has Socrates pursued this very peculiar strategy? He begins by introducing the old accusers, a new set of accusers who aren't even around, present to say anything about him now. He tells a story about those in response to those old accusers about the oracle that kind of reminds everybody in the audience of how annoying a guy he is, because he goes around asking the politicians and the poets and the craftsmen in public these embarrassing questions and gets them irritated at him. When it comes to the new accusers, he does this kind of brutal cross-examination of Meletus, making him look like an absolute fool in front of everybody, but not necessarily with great arguments. And so he kind of shows how he knows how to make the weaker speech the stronger, which is exactly what everybody was worried about with him. He makes these amazingly boastful claims. I'm the god's greatest gift to the city. I'm like the gadfly who keeps biting to keep you awake. You've never had a greater gift from the gods than my activity of philosophy. And he adds then on top of it, the reason I haven't gotten involved in politics or public life is because when a good man gets involved in politics, you kill him. It's pretty insulting. And then the last straw, I guess you could say, the last crossing of the T's and dotting of the I's, when he gets to propose a penalty, he says, I think I should get free meals for life. Okay, it's all pretty far out there. He seems to be, I think, you have to think about this and interpret it, but it seems to me pretty clear he's asking for it, right? He's not working very hard. I don't necessarily think Socrates wants to die. Most people don't want to die, but he's certainly not working very hard to get himself acquitted. I think we could even say it doesn't look as if he particularly cares if he gets acquitted. Why would that be? Well, I mean, why would he follow the strategy that seems designed to provoke people and very likely to get himself killed? I think there's a couple of things we can say about that. First, we should just observe he is a very old man. He's 70 years old, nearing the end of his life. He's lived a full life at this point. Who knows how much time he's even got left? If he goes now, probably thinks, okay, I lived a good life. I could end it now. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I think he also probably wants to set a kind of example. You might say almost make the world safe for philosophy. We can see that in Athens, the activity of philosophy, which is what he thinks is so important and cares about, is perilous. It can get you in trouble. It can get you killed. That's what happens to Socrates. And so maybe Socrates is thinking about some of those young men that he has been talking with and conversing with, who might also be drawn to the life of philosophy, and wondering, my example, if the Athenians execute me, and then, as I think they will, look back pretty soon and say, mistake, shouldn't have done that, will that make the world safer for other people who value the same activity that I do? Other philosophers want to come after me. So think Socrates is probably also, to some degree, consciously prepared to become a martyr for the sake of philosophy. And then the last thing we could say, to kind of bring this to a conclusion, is that I think Socrates really just is committed to the life of philosophy. He really thinks this is the way a person should live, that you need to be asking yourself constantly, every day, all the time, how should I live? And trying to answer that and examining yourself to see if you have a good answer to that, see if your life measures up to the standards that you hold, whether you need to revise those standards, whether you need to kind of give yourself a kick in the rear and work a little harder to live up to them, whether you can learn from other people about what a better way to live would be, all that he thinks is important. And he won't betray that. And we should note what is probably the most famous sentence from the entire dialogue. It comes near the end, almost the very end of that penalty stage where they've proposed the penalties and Socrates says, I should get free meals for life. It's right before his panicked, nervous friends say, no, we'll give you some money. But he says this, and I think you'll recognize this sentence. There are all these penalties I can't propose, exile, fine, etc. There's no point in my proposing that. Because what if somebody said, look, couldn't you just stop philosophizing? We'll let you live. Couldn't that be your penalty? Let me live. I'll live out the rest of my days in Athens, however many they happen to be, and I just won't philosophize anymore. And he says that I can't do that. But the problem is, if I try to explain to you why I can't do that, you won't believe me. You will think I'm being ironic. We talked about that before, that Socrates was regarded as ironic, as not always saying what he meant. So if I tell you what I really believe, you'll think I'm being ironic and you won't believe me. If I say that this even happens to be a very great good for a human being, make speeches every day about virtue and the other things about which you hear me conversing and examining both myself and others, and that the unexamined life is not worth living for a human being, you will be persuaded by me still less when I say these things. That's the line you probably heard. The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates says, I tell you that, you won't believe it, but that's the real reason. That's why I can't change my way of life. That's why I have to do it, because the unexamined life is not worth living. A human being needs to be asking these questions about what is just and what is pious and what is brave and what is faithful, and needs to be always prepared to revise those and try to live up to the answers that he or she comes up with to those questions. And I think that here we see Socrates' deepest commitment, right? And the reason that he's prepared to die, even for the sake of this life that he thinks is not one you can give up and still lead a truly flourishing human life. We said Socrates is ironic. That Socrates doesn't always tell you what he thinks. He asks a lot of questions, doesn't necessarily state his own views. He told us before that he learned how ignorant he is, how much he doesn't know. But I do think that if you read some Plato, you read some Socrates, there are some things that Socrates thinks he knows, and this is maybe the most important of them. You know, the unexamined life is not worth living. And so that's part of what Socrates leaves us with, right? This question for ourselves as to how committed we are to the examined life, to asking those enduring questions about human existence. And Socrates is prepared to die in order to be a model for the rest of us and help us remember the importance of always leading that examined life.